I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today. There are a couple of people, I mean, there are a lot of good friends in this room, but there are three people I wanted to say something about before I got into what I've come here to tell you about today. I want to say about Jim and Lucy Beck. They have been willing to stand with me when we were going through this fight on religious freedom. And when we talk about these things in rooms like this, obviously there's a lot of support, but it can be very isolating. And I just want to thank you so much for having my back and for being so supportive and investing in me. I want to say a quick word about Brant Frost. You know, here we are, it's the 8th of July, right? It's the dead of summer, and just look around this room, you know? I mean, people who care deeply about their community and their country, willing to come out on a Saturday morning. That doesn't just happen by accident. That happens because of dedicated leadership of people like you. And the other person I want to thank, who always seems to be around Republican events but is often sort of unseen, is my friend Jan Horn, who's working that camera back there. One of the biggest weapons we have to fight the narrative that the left pushes is information. And being able to put the information directly in front of the people. That's one thing that I think our president does absolutely the right way, which is what drives the left bananas. And Jan and I met when my friend Steve Brown, who I see back here, he and I did a little video, impromptu video, about religious freedom legislation. And I can't tell you, Jan and I were talking about it the other day, how many people still, maybe 2-3 years later, are still talking about that, and how, you know, I didn't understand that issue till I watched that video with y'all, and it was really helpful. So thank you for what you do to document the conservative movement in our state. So I just, and I could go around the room and say something about just about everybody here, but I'm not going to do that because I'm going to be mindful of the time. So back in November of 2015, you have things that happen in your life that sort of make you reassess where you are and where you're going. And for me, my mother's diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer and her death 15 weeks to the day after that diagnosis really made me start thinking about a lot of things. But one of the things that I started thinking about was my service in the state Senate. And, you know, 5 years in, you know, how much longer I'm going to do this. And finally I got to a point in January of this year where I said, you know what, I'll have served 8 years at the end of this term. I think I've done what I can do in that institution. It's time for me to move on. It's time to let somebody else serve. I just became convicted that was the right thing to do. And really my thought process was that I would probably take a break from elective politics and try to work behind the scenes, support other people for other offices. But over the last couple of months, I've had discussions with a lot of friends, some of you here in this room, about staying in elective politics and seeking another office. And so what I'm here to tell you today is I am in the race to be Georgia's next Secretary of State. And people ask, you know, why? Why is that important? Why is that something that you want to do? And the truth is, I'm very passionate, not just about policy making, but about the electoral process and how we get our elected officials in place. That's something that I've been interested in for a very long time. And the integrity of our electoral process is really the foundation stone of everything else. Every policy decision, I don't care if it's the county commission, the school board, the state house, or the White House, if we don't have confidence in our electoral process that your vote counts, and also that votes that are illegal are not being cast or counted, Nothing else really matters in terms of our process, because that's where the confidence of the people come from. Win or lose, at least we can say everyone had their opportunity to have their voice heard, to have their vote counted, and now we're going to live with whatever that consequence is. In Georgia, I am tired of the left, who cannot change our election law in the legislature because the Republicans control the legislature. So what they try to do is change election law by running to a federal judge in the middle of every election that we have. And even after it's over. But if you look at even this most recent special election with Karen Handel, we have an election on April 18th. We get down to the top two vote getters, and we have what's called a runoff. A runoff is not a new election. A runoff is a continuation of an election. But the left runs to an Obama district court judge and says, oh, you got to reopen voter registration. We don't want that 30 days to end in March. We want it to end in May. And of course, predictably, the federal district court judge appointed by Barack Obama, supports that decision and extends voter registration to May 22nd. In my view, that should not be the end of the discussion. If the left is going to try to rewrite Georgia election law, if I'm your Secretary of State, they're going to have to get the United States Supreme Court to do it. Yeah. We're not going to. The other thing that I think is incredibly important to understand, and a lot of people don't realize this happened last year, but in 2 different counties in Georgia, left-wing groups sued to have the ballots printed in foreign languages. Now, let me be real clear about this. I love the fact that America is a nation of immigrants, and we have people from all different cultures and all different walks of life, and that speak many different languages. I think that's great. That's part of what our greatness is. But when it comes to participating in the electoral process of casting your sacred, secret ballot, understanding the English language well enough to cast that vote is the price of admission. And so my pledge to you is I'm going to work with President Trump, I'm going to work with the federal officials to make sure that the law on voting is perfectly clear. That if you're going to cast a vote in a Georgia election, you're going to have to be able to read and understand English well enough to cast that vote. It's just that simple. There are also some things that we need to implement that have been on the books for a while. A lot of you may not know this, but in Georgia, we passed a law over 10 years ago. I'm sure people in this room are familiar with the idea of motor voter, where they register everyone with a pulse that gets a driver's license. Well, in Georgia, we passed a law over 10 years ago called hunter voter, that when you go get your hunting license, that you can register to vote right there. You just check a box. But we've had all these excuses about the Department of Natural Resources and how do we implement it and is there enough money? Well, let me tell you what. If every DDS office in the state is a voter registration station, you elect me your Secretary of State, we're going to implement hunter voter. It's going to happen. Now, the interesting thing about Secretary of State's office is it has a lot of different functions built into it. A lot of people don't know the Secretary of State's the guardian of the state seal. The Secretary of State is the boxing commissioner for the state of Georgia. So there are a lot of odds and ends that are kind of built into that office. But one of the other big functions is licensing. And, we have many, many licensed professions across the state. There's been a national study done by Americans for Prosperity that has demonstrated 5.4 million additional people across the country would be in the workforce if we would reform our licensure laws and make it easier for people to get licensed and get in the workplace. Now, there's some valid public safety reasons for licensing in some professions. I'm not talking about getting rid of licensing, but shouldn't we try to reform licensing laws in a way that somebody who wants to work, who wants the opportunity for good, honest work, can do that and grab that first rung on the ladder to economic success? So that's something that I think as Secretary of State, that ought to be part of my job, is getting out there with the legislature and getting that reform so that we can put hundreds of thousands of our fellow Georgians to work. Now, on the corporations division, a lot of people don't necessarily come in contact with that, but if you have a small business, if you have an LLC or corporation, then you've dealt with the corporations division in some form or fashion. There are a lot of opportunities, I think, to improve the online delivery of services, and that's something that I intend to do as the next Secretary of State. The last thing I'll mention, because I don't want to go on too long, is an issue that isn't necessarily part of the description of the office that you see, but something that I think is very important. I think that Georgia needs a chief transparency officer, somebody who is making sure that government is open to the public. And there are two ways I think the Secretary of State's office can do that. One is we need a program, I call it the Georgia checkbook, where basically all of the state finances are posted online on a website that you can go see down to a check level detail. So if you want to see how your money's being spent by the State Department of Education, the Department of Community Health, the university system, where literally billions and billions of tax dollars are flowing, you ought to be able to do that. Having a little line item on a budget, in my view, is not sufficient. And I'm just talking about for states, for the state government, but if county commissions, if municipal governments, if school districts want to participate, then we will open that system up so that they can participate as well. There's a program, my friend Josh Mandel in Ohio, he's the state treasurer up there, has rolled out very similar to this. And you can go on their website and, like I said, see down to, a state employee buying some gasoline at a gas station. And that's the level of detail I think you're entitled to as taxpayers. The other thing that I'm very committed to, and some of you in this room know the depth of my commitment to this, is our open records and open meetings laws. And I think that there's a real opportunity for the Secretary of State to talk about, be an advocate for, and an ambassador for open government. And Brant mentioned earlier there are two cameras set up in here. One of the things I'm hoping to do as I go around on the campaign trail is to be totally transparent, let people know what I'm saying. So that camera over there is going to my Facebook page. So, if I'm around the state somewhere and you can't come, but you want to hear what's being said and what we're talking about, you're going to be able to do that. So I feel like if I'm going to call for those kinds of reforms, I need to lead by example. I just close by asking for your help. We are just getting organized. We filed the paperwork Thursday. But I can... But I can tell you it's going to take a lot of work to win the Republican primary. It's a crowded field, and it's not just about raising money, though that's important, but we're going to need real grassroots warriors in every county of this state to be able to win the nomination. And so I just ask for your help. I ask for your support. I ask you to get involved. I know there are a lot of other races, and this is kind of down the ballot, maybe not as exciting to some. But I'm telling you, there's nothing more important than who you select to be the guardian of your electoral process. And with your help, that person's going to be me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.